Hello viewers. So the question for today is one that no one else has asked you. No group has debated it in the past, and I think no one has even thought about debating it. So I will put it out there to you today. And my question is, has spirituality benefited the Indian civilization, or has it harmed the Indian civilization? So that's the topic for today. So I will first talk about if it has benefited the Indian civilization. So I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. I think at an individual level, if you look at Indian history, we have had kings and emperors right from the early historic period of the Indian civilization that have been influenced by spirituality. One of the prime examples that we can think about from history is King Ashok. So remember, after the Kalinga War, where there was widespread bloodshed and destruction of human life and property, Emperor Ashoka came to the realization of the futility of war. So in a sense, that idea of futility of war is a dharmic spiritual concept, and he came to realize it through the dominant thought of that day, which was Buddhism. So King Ashok converted to Buddhism, and he renounced violence. Now, that example in itself is not not devoid of contradictions, because I think if you look at history more carefully, King Ashok didn't really denounce violence per se. I think it was more his philosophy going forward rather than something that he absolutely stuck to. So there was still violence after that realization, maybe not as widespread a scale as what he was used to previously, but it did occur. So if we look further down the civilization, we have had all these examples that I'm sure most of my viewers from India would know about of spirituality. One of the more recent examples that I can give you of Indian spirituality was Mahatma Gandhi. So Gandhi picked up, especially among other things, one of the constituents of Indian spirituality, and that is ahimsa. And as history books will tell you, that he deployed it to a great effect to bring freedom to our country, India, and even beyond the freedom movement. I think the Gandhian thought of ahimsa, which in itself was derived from Indian spirituality, has impacted India over thousands of years, but especially after Gandhi used it, I think it has been at the forefront of Indian consciousness. Having said that, we can see that there is quite a bit of debate in India itself about the efficacy of ahimsa as a means of political or mobilization of humans and resolution of disputes. So that is debatable, but at least that idea of ahimsa, which is derived from the Indian spirituality, has touched people. And if I put it in a broader context, it all fits into the global context of pacifism. So Indian spirituality itself has quite a bit of similarity with the global concept of, or the Western concept of, pacifism. If you think about prominent ideologues from the pacifism realm, like Leo Tolstoy, for example, you will see a lot of similarities in their thought, even though they arrived at that principle through their own means of realization, through their own processes. So it's very hard to say or argue if they were influenced by Indian spirituality or not. But I guess if you look at it from a holistic perspective, there are some commonalities and similarities which could be due to, divergent evolution. So, two ideas that essentially are very similar but came through different civilizations. Anyway, coming back to the topic of Indian spirituality, the interesting part is that the Indian spirituality deals more at a human level, at an individual level, rather than as a collective identity based thought. For example, when you start getting into practicing spirituality, for example, in a formal way or a structured way, what you'll find is that you, in a sense, you are looking inwards. You're looking into your thought processes, how you can control your emotions, your motivations, and the end goal of Indian spirituality, in a very simplistic way, is to escape the cycle of birth and death. So in Hindu religious thought, there is a belief that humans can go through the cycle of birth and death for thousands and millions of times, and once in a while they usually are born as humans. But the basic premise is that the cycle of birth and death is something that needs to be avoided, or ideally needs to be avoided as much as possible. So you live once, and then you get out of that cycle and move to a higher plane. Now, what I have seen, in people around me as well, and what I perceive as Indian spirituality, it does help the individual. It helps you to calm down. It helps you to focus on things that relax you and give you that satisfaction without striving a lot. And it makes you more content with what you have and reaching that inner peace, which has its place. I think it's quite beneficial to that individual. So I think I've talked enough about the benefits of Indian spirituality at an individual level. Now I'll look at the other side. So has Indian spirituality harmed the Indian civilization? So now, if you look at spirituality as we discussed, it does benefit the individual. But I'll tell you something that probably you haven't heard much before, and that is that Indian spirituality, even though it has benefited the individual, it has harmed the society. Now, it sounds contradictory, but the reality of life is that what is good for an individual might not be good for the collective society or for that collective group or community. A prime example is someone who turns to spirituality at an early life, Indian spirituality. He renounces his family life, he moves into meditation and into spiritual activities and completely distances himself from the day-to-day activities. Maybe not completely, maybe partially, but what does that mean? That means that, let's say, for example, if that person totally moves out of domestic or social life, not social life, but domestic life, that person might not get married. So that person might not procreate, he might not have children. So in a sense, one negative result of that spirituality is reduced fertility. And as you all know, which I'll discuss in a future episode, is the role of fertility in the sustenance of a community and its effects. So the second part is something that I need to describe a bit more or explain a bit more, and that is every line of thought, every religion, every thought process has got two components to it. One component is, as we discussed in the first part, the spiritual side of things, which deals with essentially that individual at a personal level, at an individual level. The second side of any thought process or religion or community is the collective action, community level collective action. The call to action is how I would describe it. Does that line of thought have enough call to action with its followers? So this is where spirituality or Indian spirituality has had a negative impact on the Indian civilization. So Indian spirituality has a very strong individual call to action in terms of improving your mental pace, in improving your thought processes, but it has got a definite negative impact on the call to action at a community level. So if you look at Indian history, for example, when the Indian kingdoms, individual kingdoms, let's say 1200 years ago or 1300 years ago, India was fragmented into multiple small kingdoms, right? They did have one thing in common at that time, and that is Hinduism and Buddhism at that time. So the Dharmic religions was something that all of these kingdoms had in common, right from Kanyakumari in South India up to, I would say, southern parts of what is today Afghanistan. So that entire geopolitical mass had that one thing in common. So when that entire geopolitical mass came under increased attacks from invading forces from the northwest, who clearly differentiated themselves on their religion, for example, Islam. So when the Islamic invasion started, what do you think was the reason that all these small dharmic kingdoms didn't cooperate, but rather conspired against each other, sometimes even getting so far as to be allies of the invading Islamic forces? So what was actually preventing that cooperation or unity, even if they had the dharmic religions in common? That, my friends, probably explains what the limitations of spirituality is, and what a predominantly spiritual religion like dharmic religion actually lacks, or what the limitations are, and that is that collective call to action. So all these small kingdoms literally didn't see anything in common, that even though they had something in common, but they didn't have that call to action to come together, right? Whereas if you look at other areas or other regions around the same time in the Western world, for example, if you look at Europe at that time was predominantly under the influence of Catholic Christianity. And when these invasions started from Central Asia right onto the doorsteps of Europe, these Islamic invasions, you had the authority, someone like the Pope from the Vatican, issuing orders for uniting all these Christian states and go to battle in what we call as the Crusades. So what you see in the Christian side of things, for example, in Christianity, you see probably a 50-50 balance. So there is some aspect of spirituality in medieval Christianity. Of course, the basic understanding is that medieval Christianity is probably quite a bit different from what we see as Christianity today, because religion evolves over time. But anyway, coming back to the topic. So if you look at Christianity at that period of time, it probably had a 50-50 balance between the spiritual, individual well-being side of things and morals and ideas. And at the same time, it had a 50% of community call to action. So, and that actually helped the Christian states to put up a collective front over the next, I would say, 700 to 800 years, where there was a clear, conflict, religious conflict in the doorsteps of Europe. So coming back to Indian spirituality and the Dharmic religions, that's what they lacked. So the individual, in one way, might benefit from the spiritual state of mind and peace of mind. But if his country, if his state is overrun by invaders and the women are raped and the temples are destroyed, then you could hardly say that anyone in that kingdom would have benefited from it. And I will leave you with a food for thought from this video today, and that is, any historical phenomena is not static. It's not an instance in history that that hasn't evolved. So this concept, this idea has evolved, and it's evolving even now. So what you see today in the Indian polity, where you have multiple schools of thoughts, multiple, for example, political parties, they might all have several things in common, but at the same time, they find it really hard to come together. Think of even simpler example, I think, which most of my viewers from India would relate to, and that is, for example, these hundreds of Indian castes, even though they have lived together and might have common origin thousands of years back, and they have so many things in common, but they find it really hard to come together or see themselves as a collective group. Compared to some other communities around in India or over the world. And that is what distinguishes Indian spirituality and Dharmic line of thought. So I think overall I would say that if you look at both sides, both the benefits and what I would argue as the disadvantages or the harm that spirituality has caused to the Indian civilization is something to be debated. I would understand that quite a few of my viewers might disagree with me, and I'm more than happy, as I always say, to hear your thoughts, your counter argument, and I'm happy. I've got an open mind to consider it and even bring this conversation forward into further videos that we can debate both sides of things. In a expanded way. So do put in your comments if there's anything that you think needs to be added, or if you don't agree with something. I totally encourage you to do that. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, bye.